the clearer and more specific the plan you give, when you start to notice that expectations are starting to slip, the more likely you are to actually act on it, because now you have a clear plan, like, like lighted steps forward to be sure that to say, okay, I need to engage, and I feel scared, and I'm going to default to comfort and avoidance if I don't have something. But if I light this staircase up and I have that exit ramp lined up for me, okay, now I'm more likely to actually engage in the behavior I know I need to do for the benefit of me, my relationships, and my company.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, and we are always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, and this is an expert episode. So the guest is Jerry Fu, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the thing that people always try to avoid, which is conflict resolution, work relationships, how to fire someone, or how to deal with difficult bosses or employees, maybe a bit of romantic relationships, and all the things that are always uncomfortable that you're trying to avoid, but you need to know how to deal with. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Jerry.
Hey, thanks for having me, Devin.
So I gave kind of a quick introduction as to what we're going to be talking about, but maybe before we dive into that, maybe just give everybody, the audience, a 1 or 2 minute introduction about yourself and a little bit about why you're the expert or why you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, sure. I tell people I am one beggar telling other beggars where to find bread. It's like I'm not the artful dodger who avoided all the major mistakes that people make in terms of conflict. I am the guy who, got my face pushed in the mud and, decided to figure out how this tastes and how I can get used to it in terms of how to help others. And so the reason, some of the things I dealt with, I got fired from the job I came to Houston for. So that was a wake-up call. I've had to fire people. So, hearing some of the things I used to say before I got fired from other people was definitely a wake-up call. I've had to evict a roommate. That was a fun situation. I had to confront another guy when I was a church class director. When I found out he was sexually harassing women in the class, I had to kind of, fall on that grenade. And so, yeah, between dealing with, conflicts with my parents as to my career path and, my own romantic endeavors that got shot down, we all deal with it. But I believe that in my path to go from being a pharmacist into a leadership and conflict resolution coach, that I've been down this road, and I want to help people have an easier path to success when it comes to conflict resolution.
Oh, that was a great introduction. Sounds like certainly a fun journey, and another day, we'll have to dive into a bit more of that journey and chat about that. But now, kind of diving into the topic at hand, which I'll start out with maybe the one that the most that make people, or a lot of people, probably not me so much. I don't mind conflict nearly as much. My wife hates it, and most of my friends hate it. I'm like, I like to debate and I like to argue, and I don't have a problem with it. But for most people, conflict resolution, in other words, especially, and we'll talk about it within the work setting. If you're having marital strife or relationships or that at home, those ones will be maybe for a different episode or a different podcast. But if you're at work and you're having conflict, and this could be usually I can see it taking a few forms. One can be if you're the boss and you're having conflict with your employees. Another could be if you're an employee and you're having a conflict with the boss. And the third one is if you're an employee having a conflict with another employee. But kind of as you're looking to tackle that and kind of figure out, depending on the different circumstances, what are some guiding principles, or how do you start to deal with conflict resolution when you get to work?
Yeah. The first tip that comes to mind is to realize that conflict never actually goes away. And so people think, and I used to think this too, if I fired this person, or if I wrote this person up, or, and that's good. You have some degree of closure. That's the first thing, is to say, okay, I'm going to choose closure over my own comfort, because if I stay comfortable, the problem won't go away on its own. That's really a big problem when people think, oh, well, if I just wait long enough, maybe they'll figure out why I'm upset with them. That doesn't work, right? But to recognize, hey, there's always going to be some kind of conflict, whether it's healthy conflict or unhealthy conflict. You want healthy conflict. That's okay when people realize, hey, we can disagree on the why and the how. of certain things, of certain programs or such. But then when you have unhealthy conflict, when there's mismanaged or unmet expectations, now you have to make some really important and difficult decisions as to whether, as Maxwell says, right, do I train this person? Do I transfer this person? Do I terminate this person? And too often, right, we don't like simple answers like that. But really, those are the only three options you have if you're an owner, right?
So let's dive into that a little bit, because
Mhm.
we'll go with the first scenario, which is the owner. You're the business owner, you're the CEO, you're the founder, the person in charge, you're the boss type of a thing. And I guess you don't have to always be the owner. You could be
Of course,
the
yeah, a supervisor
manager,
of some kind.
the supervisor, a manager, something like that. But the person in charge, at least over the employees, that has the ability to let someone go, to fire them, or to try and train them. How do you go through and make the determination? Because easiest in some, and I don't know if it's easiest. I was gonna say easiest to some degrees is to let them go. Now, it's not fun to let people go. I've done it before. It's not a fun circumstance. Sometimes it's needed. But how do you start to say, okay, is this a training problem? I haven't trained them properly. Is this they can't get along with people? This is I should let them go, or kind of how do you work your way through? Do I transfer them? Do I let them go? Do I fire them? Do I train them? Or kind of how do you work or start to make those decisions?
Yeah. I think the first is just to, I like what Brene Brown talks about, or what other people say, when you have to assume positive intent, right? When you want to say, hey, you know what, they're doing the best they can. So that can be taken one of two ways. Either that's if they're honestly giving the best effort, okay, well, let's show them a little grace. And at the same time, if they are still coming short of standards, then you still have to realize if you can't give what you don't have, and you can give me 5, but the job requires 10, like I have to let you go, right? Because if you don't meet 10, the company dies, right? Or the company will suffer needlessly. So the first thing, I'm sure you've heard this before, and maybe audience, maybe this is a good reminder, right? You don't hire for skills, you hire for attitude, right? Because you can teach skills, right? If the person, as Henry Cloud talks about in Necessary Endings, he says there's wise people, there's foolish people, and there's evil people, right? Wise people, right, if assuming that they are good at what they do and they're competent and they've earned your trust, right, if they do something wrong or if something's not going according to plan, right, all you have to do is just maintain a level of maintenance, of preventive maintenance, right? Just say, hey, here's some feedback, and they internalize it. They don't take it personally. They say, hey, my boss is telling me this for my good and the good of the company. Let's make some adjustments. I demonstrate that I've taken this feedback seriously and I implement that, and it's done. Easy enough. Right.
It's just I'm gonna jump in just because I'm gonna give you a real world scenario that I wanted to ask you. It's one I'm not gonna get into in details because I have no idea if the employee or former employee, and I'm not even, but we'll give a kind of a generalized scenario, one that I've dealt with before. So you have an employee, I'll say I'm the boss, but you have an employee that has a habit that drives you nuts. So it's not detrimental to the company. It doesn't harm the company. It's not creating strife within other workers, but it just drives you nuts. And you talk to the employee a couple times and say, hey, this needs to change. It really bothers me. And, it creates some friction, and, they'll change for 2 or 3 months, and then they go back to doing the habit. And then you'll have a second conversation. They change for a month or two, go back to the habit. And you kind of get to the situation where, okay, I either have to accept it or I have to let them go, or, you kind of lose hope. In that situation, when you are in the managerial or the boss position, how do you start to deal with that circumstance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, a real life example I'll give you is punctuality at my day job. And it's like, where we've been open for 4 years, and yet somehow like you still forget like what time we open or what time is acceptable to be here on time. And so this falls into kind of the realm of foolish people. I wouldn't say, maybe I would call them foolish, but it is like well-meaning, but ultimately like no follow-through people, right? It's just like, oh yeah, I know I need to be on time, but there's no follow-through. And so with people in the second category, right, you need to establish very clear and airtight boundaries, right? You need to give clear consequences for what happens when they cross those boundaries. Because on one hand, kind of to your point, right, is this a problem with my preferences, or is this a principle problem? Right. Like if this person just has like this really annoying high pitched laugh, and you're just saying, well, I think it sounds smarmy when they're talking with customers, but they're not actually losing business because of it. You might just drop that one, right? You're just like, okay, I could split hairs over my preference as to how they should address customers, but ultimately, if as long as they're building good relationships, that's not up to me to get in the way of that. But if it is something like punctuality, and you say, hey, the team is resentful and they're unfocused because you're continually late. Okay, you have to set boundaries to say, okay, if you are late 4 times, in the next week or so, I'm going to write you up. And then here are three write-ups. And then after 3 write-ups, you have probation, and probation, at any point, if I decide I'm done with you, you're done. Right.
So
And you just have to set very clear boundaries.
Flavor just a little bit, because I think that's great, or
Yeah.
great advice. And as an attorney, I love to play devil's advocate. So we'll take
Go
it
for
one
it.
step further. Let's say it's
Yeah.
not punctuality, where you're not always able to,
Mhm.
you're always monitoring, punctuality
Mhm.
is a little bit easier. You can see, are they showing up on
Yeah.
time or they're not? Do they clock in
Yeah.
time? But let's say they're expending an abnormal amount on water breaks, where they're sitting around the coffee table, the water cooler, or in the, break room, and they're, everybody else takes 15, 20, whatever the number is, depending on, 30 minutes for lunch break, and 15 minutes throughout the day, and this person's taking an hour break a day, so it's more than what everybody else is expected, but they are a great worker, they do a good job, and they, everything else you like about the employee, but you just have this one thing where, like, it feels like they're taking advantage in that one area. Is it one, so you're kind of caught because you like the employee, they do a good job. On the other hand, you're saying it feels kind of like they're cheating me on some of the time that I'm paying them. How do you deal with that one?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I mean, the first is just to get curious, right? Right. Can we assume positive intent to say, hey, okay, well, are they still getting work done? Okay, sure. All right. But yeah, let's talk about this to say, hey, I've noticed, right, that you seem to take 30 or an hour when everyone else is taking 30 minutes, and they're like, well, yeah, I have extra family issues or things like that, and they need a longer lunch in order to da da da. You say, okay, well, thank you for giving me a clear picture of that. And, what kind of effect does that have? What do you think that effect has on the rest of the team? Right. Like that. So now it's not just about how they're affecting you. You kind of shed light on, hey, how does this affect team dynamics and morale when they see that they feel like you're not pulling your weight because you're taking long lunches? Oh, that's ideally, hypothetically, right? That's not good, because there's some employees in real life, they'll be like, well, I'm still fine. Like, I don't know why this is a problem, right? They're going to do that. And to say, could you, are you willing to, experiment with the idea of taking a shorter lunch and then dealing with some of these personal issues, like after work or before work, so that it's not affecting your perception? And I mean, because the approach I've taken, this is real life advice, guys. Like, I tell people, I'm like, look, what kind of reputation do you think you've established here? Right. And then they're like, well, I think and then they start to realize, oh, well, I'm not on time a lot. And, I'm not focused a lot. And I realize, oh, people say, oh, she's always kind of, flaky in the head. It's like, okay, well, how are you going to change that? Right. Like, how do you want to affect that change so that people aren't always, dogging you for being late, or, taking long lunches. Right. And now you start to empower the person and realize, hey, you know what? I didn't realize that this is how this comes across. And to say, hey, you know what? Even if you think you're right about the situation, how do you want to change things for the better so that people aren't resenting you behind your back, possibly, for what you're doing? So that's
no. I think that's great advice. Now I'll push one last question, then we'll jump
Go
on
ahead.
to
Yeah,
the conversation. Let's say you have that whole conversation, and they, in kind of to almost the original scenario, they make an improvement, they do good for a couple months, and then you see them, they're starting to take long lunches again, and then they kind of reverting back to old habits, which, people generally, we're creatures of habit. And, while you try to make change, that's why a lot of times people try diet, and then you go back to the old way that you're eating because you enjoy it more, right? And the same kind of thing there is. So if you try and, and then you have a conversation with them maybe a second time, you say, okay, I'll give them another chance, help them to, and same thing, month or two, they make the change, and then they go back to old habits. What point is it, do you continue to give them the benefit of the doubt, versus at what point do you kind of say, okay, I've done my best, I've tried my hardest as a manager, as a person, I got to do something else, or what do I do here, type of thing? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. And that's, in coaching, we talk about coaching with compassion, or coaching for compliance. And unfortunately, guys, like, this is no one likes to hear what I'm about to tell you, but sometimes you have to coach for compliance in this case, because it's just to say, hey, look, and part of it is having not just annual reviews, but like quarterly reviews, right? So you can give this regular feedback to say, hey, look, we, over the first month or two we were talking about this, you've been great with punctuality, but then I've started, you can look at the clocking time. So that way, subjective evidence to say, no, you're starting to slip again, right? Or something to that effect. And then you can say, hey, look, whether you want to tie it into their bonus, or things like that, to say, hey, look, I'm going to have to give you a lower score, and that's going to affect your bonus, right? So you want to give them consequences when they don't, not just from like a value added standpoint where that you can't really quantify, right? But to say, hey, look, I've given you 6 months to improve on this, and you're still not consistent. So now I have to step up my standards, and to say, hey, look, if you are not on time for the next like 2 or 3 months, we're going to have to go down the write up and probation path, because I've exhausted everything else I can to appeal to your innate desire to be a good employee, and those are no longer working. Right. So you want to play in this space up here first, absolutely, and exhaust that whole toolbox before you start to resort to step across this line and you sneeze wrong and you're done. Right. That's our, and that's the ugly side of leadership that people don't tell you about until you have to do it. And so it's like, all right, guys, let's expose this ugly underbelly, because if you don't give leaders like a real picture of the challenges they're going to face and real ugly tools to deal with ugly situations, they're not going to sign up, because you were lying to them to begin with. So yeah.
No, and I think that that is great advice. And it is one that's hard. I've seen some leaders that they continue to give them chances, and basically they just give up and say, well, I either got to decide whether I'm going to fire them or I'm just going to have to deal with it. And then you make that determination as to are they the value that they provide to the company worth keeping them, or is it saying, hey, this is just creating too much of a issue within the company, even if they do great work. Yeah. It's having negative consequence over here. Some people just say, I'm tired of it, I've got to let it go. But I think that I think that's a good balance. So now let's switch gears a little bit on the conflict resolution to now, if you're on the employee side, and if you're dealing with another employee, we'll quit picking on the bosses for a minute, but you're dealing with another employee that you do have conflicts with, and that can be everything from I think there's a difference if they're being sexual harassing or being abusive. That one's a pretty clear cut. Turn them in. If the company doesn't do something, you should probably leave. But if it's not harassing, but it's just the employee is rude or aggressive or belligerent, something that doesn't rise to the level of abuse or something along those lines, but it's just you continually have conflicts. You can't get along with them. Everything you do, you want to do one thing and they always oppose you and do the other, or whatever that is. How do you deal with conflicts between employees?
I could pull from I've had so many examples, because basically my failure was the fact that there are employees who are conflict averse. They would be upset with another employee, and they come to me and say, hey Jerry, can you go talk to them about this? And I'm just like, no, like I made the mistake. I basically got caught in putting too many rules on the line, and then like they would kind of contradict each other, and then they would all get mad at me for being a bad referee. And I'm just like, no, like this is not a good system. So I would tell them, I'm just like, okay, let's say if I'm talking peer to peer with somebody, I can tell them, I'm just like, hey, look, that's usually the easiest to say, hey, look, I'm just looking out for you, right? This is what I'm seeing from my side. Do we agree on a solution? Do we agree that this is what's best? And it's like, yes. It's like, hey, so here are some things I'm concerned about in terms of trying to reach this goal or this result, right? This is what I'm seeing from you. This is how it makes me feel, right? They can't refute your feelings. Like I feel hurt when, you are abrasive in the language you use towards me and other people, even if you don't mean anything malicious by it. Can we talk about how to better communicate in a way that people, both sides feel respected, right? And so the question that I like to always ask is, how do you shift from confrontation to collaboration, right? How do you move from opposite sides of the table to the same side of the table? And when you affirm, hey, we're teammates, we're looking out for each other. Hey, here are some obstacles I'm noticing in terms of establishing a good relationship with you. Let me hear from you as well to say, what can I do better as well to make sure that you feel respected and appreciated? I think those are a lot of fun, actually.
Fun for you, maybe not for the person.
I know, right?
No, I'll ask one or follow-up question. You get a wide range of people that are willing to deal with conflicts. In other words, I don't mind conflict. I'm an attorney. I probably like to argue. I like to debate, but even there's still conflicts, even within me that I just don't like to deal with. At some point you just saying this is still not fun. Everybody has those points. And there's people like my wife that she hates conflict. She would rather, put it aside or deal with it or ignore it or whatever, because she'd rather not have conflict. And so if you're more on the side that you don't want to hit it, your tendency is to just avoid conflict, to ignore it or otherwise not deal with it. How do you work up the guts to do it, or whatever you want to call it, to actually deal with conflict if it really does need to be dealt with?
Oh yeah. So what's funny for you is right. Usually it's the opposite problem where like the wife is upset and the guy's like, I gotta hide because I don't want to deal with this upset woman. But
I would say it at work. Now home is
yeah,
different, but at least
fair
at
enough.
work.
No, that's fair. But well, so I mean, because I was conflict avoidance for the longest time just due to cultural norms and things like that. But I guess some of the turning points for me, speaking as someone who is tends to conflict avoid, like and upon first like reflex, the first you have to ask yourself is, um, you know, how much longer will I tolerate this? Like, what is the cost of inaction, right? Because if you're already upset, right, you realize that just trying to suppress your frustration and just hope that again people figure out why you're upset with them and fix it on their own. Unless you say something, they're just going to assume that the default is fine, right? If a technician types up a prescription wrong and I fix it for them, right, they're not going to realize that they did it wrong. But
Mhm.
maybe I give them one benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just had a busy day. They just slipped up once. It's not a consistent pattern. Sure, I'll fix it in the interest of time or so. But if it happens again and I refuse to do something about it, now the problem is on me, right? Because I didn't
Mhm.
say something to fix the issue. So the two initial tips are, yeah, number one, ask yourself, what is my hesitation costing me? You know, and then number two, or no, two and three. So two is where can I find 10 seconds of courage? Because you don't need to be Superman. You don't need to like, get into like Superman or Wonder Woman mode before you finally charge ahead. You just need 10 seconds to be like, hey, can I pull you aside for, just like 10 minutes? Right. You just need to have 10 seconds to like fire off that text or pick up the phone or send that email and just say, hey, look, I'd like to talk to you. Third is remember to sell the benefits of this conversation. Um, what what can I gain by having this conversation? Oh, I can reset expectations. I can go back to enjoying being around this person again. Hey, okay, yeah, this is a conversation worth having. I'm willing to get past my initial discomfort in order to have this because the closure is really more enjoyable than just sitting in my comfort zone.
Mhm.
I think that's really kind of the bonus tip right there. It's just to realize that closure is always better than comfort. Because yeah, when I evicted my roommate for defaulting on his lease, I can assure you, like the comfort zone I was staying in was terrible. It is the closure that came from finally convincing him to move out before I called the cops, where I could finally just exhale and just say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm past that." Right.
No, and I think that's all a lot of great advice. So now I am going to switch gears just a little bit to a
Yeah.
different, another kind of related conflict, I guess, or has a potential for conflict, which
Yeah.
is relationships at the office, and how that
Mm,
one can be some companies are, oh, we're fine if you have a relationship as long as it doesn't bleed into work. Don't worry
hmm
about it. You can do whatever you want. You're adults.
hmm
Now they're just saying, hey, we've had way too many, whether it's sexual harassment suits or have had way too many conflicts and people getting mad or employees leaving because they break up or whatever. And
Yeah.
so, maybe we'll go from the employer perspective first of how do you deal with relationships at the office? Should you take a more lenient? Should you take a more aggressive? Or how do you start to set that or set those boundaries?
Yeah, I think it's just there's so much empirical evidence one way or the other, but and plus every company is different. But I mean, I hate to say it depends, but I mean the questions to ask yourself around what if you are a owner, right? And you have to ask yourself, what is your comfort level? Like, what is your instinct telling you, right? To say, okay, if I find out that two people, are starting to date and they're like, canoodling in like the break room, right? And instead of getting work done, it's like, okay, no, like that's the problem, right? If you maybe lay clear boundaries just to say, hey, look, if you choose to like attempt to date a coworker, any personal relationship related, activity or news needs to stay off the clock, right? Like you can have a relationship so long as it does not affect company productivity. As soon as it does, though, and you have to be able to be flexible with that policy because if like two people start to be like break up and now it's all awkward for everyone else in the office, it's like, okay, nope, never mind. Like I gave you that chance. At this point, we're just better off saying, hey, no dating at all, period. And if we find out, then, or if that does happen, hey, one of you's going to have to transfer or move on to another company, what's that going to be? Because yeah, realistically, rarely have I seen a situation where personal relationships don't complicate like on the clock productivity. So that is my personal preference to say, hey, you know what? I know some every rule has exceptions. I'm sure everybody will push back. That's like, no, well, she's hot, and it's just like, well, just be honest about that, right? I want to date her. It's like, all right, man, just as long as you know what kind of territory you have to navigate. But yeah, the simple answer is probably not. Just don't deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's probably, it opens up a Pandora's box. I mean, everything from, and then you're saying one's a supervisor and one's inferior, then it opens you up to potential for, HR problems or for sexual harassment problems, even if it is consensual, because breakups tend to not usually go well with most people. And, especially if you're working, you sought to see the other person. And while it may have been good intended at one point, I think it can evolve and shift. And then, it's hard, especially if you're in a relationship, things outside of work. I'm married, and even my wife doesn't work for me. But even when I have a bad day at home with, when everybody has good days and bad days with a marriage. And so but I think that it carries into work. And now if you had to do that, when you're at work, and yet at the same time, I get people, attorneys are terrible. We work a whole bunch of hours. We always, we never stop working type of thing. We work, we're at the office all the time. And so you're saying, well, if I don't date someone in the office, it's going to be hard to find someone. So I do think that, to your point, it does depend a little bit, but I think that there's a lot more potential issues than there are a lot more benefits, at least from the employer side.
I agree with that. Yeah. It's like you can, but you probably shouldn't. I think that's the simple coverall answer.
Exactly. All right. Last, and this is a fun conversation. I could go on for much longer, and I'm sure we'd enjoy it, but it'd probably go beyond the attention span of everybody else.
We can do a part 2 later. It's fine. Yeah.
That's right. One other question. So one of the hard things, I think that every person that they think they'd be better at it until they actually get in the situation, which is firing somebody or letting someone go. And everybody thinks, oh, you can just tell them, just fire them, just pull them in your office, say you're not doing a good job, and let you go. And yet every time you get into it, especially if they have a family and they have kids, and they have a wife, or they just moved there, or they're doing or not doing well, not doing well financially. Everybody, I never seen someone, at least people that I've hired, that have said, oh yeah, that would be easy to let them go. They'll land on their feet. They have a job lined up. They'll be fine. They won't have any issues. And so, when you do get to that situation, if you have made your determination, okay, I need to let this one go, and it's for what, this individual go for whatever reason, how do you go about letting someone go and firing someone?
Yeah, I think part of it is just having empathy for the person that you're about to let go, right? Treating them with dignity and giving them, like, the best case scenario is to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, you are not meeting expectations, whether there is a legitimate reason for this or not. At the very best, this job is not a good fit for you, because if we're saying these are our expectations and you're only realistically able to meet about half of them, like, this cannot continue. Right. If we keep you on, the company will die. Like, if we want to, like, basically give that trajectory, if we settle for people only giving half of what the company knows that it needs to survive, this company will not survive. And so the best thing I can do for you is to let you move on so that you can find a company better suited to your needs and preferences and skills. Right. And I mean, that's at the very least. I mean, don't get me wrong. I probably, in my mind, I'm just like, I'm much more frustrated with you than what I'm letting on. But now is not the time to take cheap shots at you or, unload my own personal frustration, because it is, like, I know how upset my bosses were with me when I got fired. And I do my best to remember, hey, as upset as I am to hear victim statements and blaming and lack of responsibility whenever someone pushes back when I'm upset with them, as a boss, at the end of the day, I need to let them move on to a job that would actually suit their preferences. And that's fine. Hopefully they're out there. If they are, great. If not, they need to change, but not on my timetable any longer.
Yeah. And I think that one thing, if you're on the employee side, at least 99% of, there's probably 1% out there of bosses that like to fire people. For 99%, the boss doesn't want to do it any more than, or the manager, or the supervisor doesn't want to do it any more than the person being let go. It's not like it's a fun thing. When I've done it, most of the time as a boss, you're saying, we'll give them one more chance, or we'll wait a little bit longer. And you try and give them probably more chances than they deserve, just because you have sympathy for them and you want to, or, you are a human yourself and you understand their situation. And so usually they're coming into it dreading it as much as the employee. But I think, to your point, I think where I've come is most of the time is saying, hey, there's usually a reason why you're letting them go. And it's a lot of times it's because they're not happy with their work. They don't enjoy it. It's not fit, or it doesn't suit their skill set, or, any number of things. And it's probably better for them in the long run, even though in the short term it sucks, to let them know, hey, this position probably does not fit with what you will want. And whether it's, you have aspiration in the future that we're just not going to be able to help, or you don't like the job or responsibilities, or, your skill sets, you just, that this isn't your skill set. You need to find something you're passionate about. And I think that's, at least for me, has worked better, of at least trying to go with the thing of, I want the best for you. This situation for both of us is not the best for you. And so let's see what we can do. And then a lot of times I'll say, if you need help transitioning, finding something else, I'd love to help you out. Unless they're just really bad, you just don't want to give them a recommendation, give them a recommendation, or look at your network, or give connections, I think is a good way to transition out.
Yep. Yeah, it is. And yeah, when you just don't cut them and then just say, good luck trying to swim in this giant ocean, like give them resources. A book I would give now, like even to people, whether I fire them or not, there's a great book called Designing Your Life, and even Designing Your Work Life as a spinoff, just to say, hey, look, how do you create a job and a career that you would actually be excited about, right? And then now you're trying to empower them to realize, hey, you know what? Yeah, we have to end this chapter, and this is your opportunity to start a new one, and it's up to you.
No, and I think that's great advice. So, well, we've now got towards the end of the podcast, and maybe we'll have to have you back on part 2 sometime. I think that would be fun. Definitely a lot more things that we could cover. But we've covered several different things, and always at the end of each expert episode, I always want to give people at least one takeaway. Listen to this for half an hour, and there's a lot of things you could start going. Most of the time, you won't start going, or you get overwhelmed, or anything. If you're talking to somebody that's the founder, co-founder, manager, boss, of a business, and they can only get one takeaway, one thing that they should be doing today or should get going on today, what would that one thing be?
Yeah. I guess for some reason, the thing that comes to mind is simply to ask yourself, if you are dealing with someone who's underperforming, what kind of like tripwire deadline do you want to set for yourself? To say, okay, if this goes on for 3 months, okay, I will initiate a conversation. Script your key deadlines and timetables and key phrases that you want to be sure to address. Like this, the clearer and more specific the plan you give, when you start to notice that expectations are starting to slip, the more likely you are to actually act on it, because now you have a clear plan, like lighted steps forward to be sure that to say, okay, I need to engage, and I feel scared, and I'm going to default to comfort and avoidance if I don't have something. But if I light this staircase up, and I have that exit ramp lined up for me, okay, now I'm more likely to actually engage in the behavior I know I need to do for the benefit of me, my relationships, and my company.
No, I think that's absolutely great takeaway, and definitely something people should take to heart. So, well, with that, as we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to hire you to give that, all the training in the world and be the best coach in the world for their business. They want to be an employee of yours. They want to get trained by you. They want to be an investor if you take on investment dollars. They want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above. What's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Absolutely, yes. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I have a profile there. That is the one social media profile that I have. Otherwise, if you want to engage in something more professional and intentional, my website is adaptingleaders.com. There's a free PDF download for a framework for having difficult conversations. And you can also schedule a complimentary 30-minute call just to tell me about what you're working on, or tell me your story. Or if you have, hey, Jerry, I got a situation I need your help with. No strings attached, just give yourself a free sample to help. If that's all you need, great. If you want to invest more, hey, I got plenty of coaching packages, and you can figure out what works best for you or your organization.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage people to take advantage or any of all of the above, and definitely a great resource as you're building and growing your business or starting your business. So, well, thank you again, Jerry, for coming on. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, or you want to have your own expertise to share, feel free to apply to be on the podcast. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. 2 more things as listeners. 1, make sure to click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And 2, leave us a review so everyone else can find out about all of our awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, let's go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Well, thank you again, Jerry. It's been it's been a pleasure, a lot of great knowledge, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin. Have a great day, everybody.